So now let's go through the text, Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life. Is it on? Thank you. According to historians, the author Shantideva wrote Bodhisattva Charyavatara in the 8th century. So it's been over 1,000 years since then. And during that period of time, with regards to the instruction for the cultivation of bodhicitta, this text is the best. We can say it's the best text for that. Even today, this text is very powerful. So he based, Shantideva based himself on Nagarjuna's Bodhicitta Vivarana and Ratnavali, which show the practice of equalizing and exchanging self and others. So he may have used these texts of Nagarjuna as his source. And then from in the philosophical point of view, Shantideva's philosophical understanding of how things exist is similar to, same as the master Chandrakirti. So Master Chandrakirti was a master who explicated the intent or the thought of Nagarjuna in terms of the profound and extensive path correctly. And Master Shantideva wrote first Shiksha Samuchaya, the compendium of practices, and then he wrote the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. So in history, in terms of chronology, in this text he mentions to read his other two texts, Sutra Samuchaya or the Shiksha Samuchaya. And then in our historical accounts we find mention some scholars went to see Shantideva and asked him where these texts are, and he replied to them in his room on the beam of his room. Then he has written in the Pandita script, he has said, and it's there. And therefore, Shiksha Samuchaya was written before before Bodhisattva Charyavatara. And then of the 6 Kadamba texts, there is a tradition of combining these two texts and giving teachings. There is a significance to that. What is extensively covered in one text is in Shiksha Samuchaya is not covered extensively in Bodhisattva Charyavatara and vice versa. So I received teaching on Bodhisattva Charyavatara early on in exile, and then from Satya Master Abbot Gunga Wangchuk, I received teachings on the Shiksha Samuchaya, and I have actually revived the tradition of these teachings. And in fact, the 6 classics are of the Kadamba masters, and I feel I have made some contribution in the Dharma through this. So the text, a guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. In Sanskrit, Bodhisattva Charyavatara. Tibetan chanju sambe chabala chukpa. This a big prostrations to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And then verse 1a and 1b. So when the text, Buddhist text, and also text of medicine and Sanskrit, learning Sanskrit, and also poetry, but mainly Buddhist inner science and logic and epistemology were translated into Tibetan from Indian language. In terms of the translations, we have over 100 words of the Buddha translated into Tibetan, and 225 volumes translated from Indian language. And so there we have about 330 volumes. But few of these texts were translated from Chinese into Tibetan. For example, there's a commentary on the Samdi Nimochana Sutra, which was written by Wenzek in Chinese and translated into Tibetan. And so the mention of the title in Sanskrit or Indian language shows the genuine origin of the teaching, authenticity of the text. So those of you who in this university who have learned Sanskrit, of course you have left a great imprint on the language in your mind. But what practical blessing or use do you find from Sanskrit? The main purpose of the teachings is to actually make a transformation within our mind. Mainly, we have to use our intelligence. So in the practice of Buddhism, we need to use our intelligence and differentiate between what is right, between right and wrong. So if we refer to the Buddha from the point of view of his, in terms of his omniscience, so which shows knowledge, and then the 6 perfections, the rest of the other 5 perfections get the name perfection because of the perfection of wisdom. And then the part called bodhicitta and renunciation and the principle of taking refuge also has to happen with the help of wisdom and intelligence, without which these aspirations will not be easy. It's very difficult to have these aspirations with certitude. So to have a very firm determination or aspiration, you need to have the backing up of and the support of valid cognition, and therefore you need wisdom to support the aspirations. Therefore, human life, as far as we can see, human life is very wonderful because of this intelligence that we have. And so, in the practice of Dharma, we need to use our intelligence to make a difference in a great way. So the titles in Indian language and Tibetan. So with regard to the title in Tibetan, Changchup Sempa Bodhisattva. So Arya Vibhutisana's commentary on Abhisamaya Alamkara, which is a text commentary on Prajnaparamita Sutras as well, 25,000, he mentions the Bodhisattva's focus on liberation with wisdom, and then view or look at the sentient beings with compassion. So wisdom, the compassion is compassion which feels the suffering of others unbearable, and therefore, in order to liberate sentient beings from suffering, the bodhisattvas focus their mind or direct their mind on enlightenment with wisdom. So engaging in the bodhisattva way of life. So with regard to the bodhisattva practices, there is the practice to be engaged, or the entry, which is bodhicitta, which actually takes you into the Mahayana path. And then, having entered the path with bodhicitta, you go through the practices of the 6 perfections, which are the means leading to the goal. And then, having practiced and trained yourself in these 6 perfections, then you attain the rupakaya, the physical body, the form body of the Buddha, which is being accessible to sentient beings, serve others. The mind of the Buddha is not accessible to us directly, and therefore Nagarjuna refers to, makes this prayer, may this virtue let me accumulate the two stores of merit and wisdom, through which may I attain the 2 bodies of the Buddha. So the form body. So this lamp is quite warm and it gives light as well. So it's really good for me. And so the Buddhism in Tibet is a complete Buddhism, comprising the fundamental teachings as well as Mahayana and Tantrayana, the Sutrayana and Tantrayana. So I usually say this: the form body, which is meant for the purpose of others, will not serve its purpose just by appearing to others. But of course, the bodhisattvas, right from the beginning, when they actually cultivate bodhicitta, they have such a determination, as in the prayers at the end of the first chapter, the last verse, I bow, I seek refuge in that source of joy who brings happiness, even those to those who bring harm. And so, through the practice of the bodhisattvas, then you become a Buddha, and Buddhas engage in the in helping others through what is known as the 27 enlightened activities. And so in order to be able to help others infinitely, sentient beings infinitely, you should have the body, speech, and mind which become of one taste. So the bodhisattvas and others are able to help sentient beings, but because of not having the 3, the body, speech, and minds being of one taste, therefore they are not able to help others effortlessly. So to be able to help others effortlessly through the Buddha's enlightened activities, when the sentient beings are receptive, then the Buddhas can actually perform these enlightened activities. In order to perform the enlightened activities, the effortlessly, where the Buddha's mind is, the body also has to be there. And therefore, this does not come only through the physical and verbal virtuous practices, but it has to come through the subtlest mind and body. And therefore, you have, because of this subtlest body and mind that is attained during the time of the trainee level bodhisattvas, therefore, you can finally, ultimately reach the goal of enlightenment, where the body, speech, and mind are of one taste. And when you reach that state, then you have your mind in absorbed meditation, absorption, totally absorbed in meditation, while being able to see the multiplicity of things as well. And so the main purpose of is to serve others. In order to be able to serve others' interest without one's attaining Dharmakaya, it's not possible. Therefore, you have to attain the truth body of a Buddha. In order to have the form body. And so the 6 perfections are the means to achieve the complete enlightenment taught. And then by engaging in these means, then what you attain is the 2 bodies, form body, which is meant for the interest of others, and the Dharmakaya, the truth body, which is meant for one's own interest. And so you attain these 2 bodies of a Buddha. And therefore, this book, because it deals with the subject matter of this book is these the practices leading to that goal of enlightenment. Therefore, the title, given the title, and engaging in the practices of bodhisattvas. So with regard to titles of books, sometimes titles are named after the author. For example, Buddha Palita, Master Buddha Palita wrote. And then Madhyamaka Avatara, engaging in the middle way, is given the title from the point of view of its subject matter, which is engaging or leading into Madhyamaka, the fundamental treatise of the middle way, by way of explaining the extensive and the profound way of bodhisattvas. And sometimes we have texts which have very elaborate names. In Tibet, Tibetan masters have written texts with very elaborate, elegant names, but the Indian masters have given their titles of their books just to be able to catch what the subject matter would be. Very simple titles. So I pay homage to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Is written by the translators. So this book actually deals with the 3 trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. For example, the chapter on conscientiousness shows the practice of morality. And then the 8th chapter shows the practice of concentration. And then, of course, the 9th chapter, particularly a wisdom chapter. Wisdom. And so this book itself deals with the 3 trainings. And then, respectfully, I prostrate to my Sugatas, who are endowed with Dharmakaya, as well as their noble children, and all who are worthy of veneration. shows the worship, expression of worship or salutation. And so with regard to the term Sugata, we have Sugata in terms of the qualities of abandoning negativities and developing realization. And so the very term Sugata, or the blissful gone, Master Chandideva himself says, which intelligent one would feel despair to ride the horse of bodhicitta, which leads one to from bliss to bliss. And then through the practice of the four, which has the four attributes, will make you able to complete the collections of merit and wisdom very quickly, easily. So when you think about all these practices, they should give you great inspiration. In the 8,000 verses of Prajnaparamita Sutra, where it deals with the same, the bodhicitta, there is this mention of be proud or confident. So here, Popa refers to the state of mind where there is a delight in you, and therefore you feel determined to engage in the practices. You whip up the courage, and therefore it's not the pride that you draw through arrogance and so forth, jealousy, competitive feeling. So here we think about benefiting others and therefore have this confidence within. So therefore bodhicitta gives you this inspiration to feel proud. And when you feel delighted to engage in the practices of bodhisattvas, then even when you are suffering, you don't really are bogged down by it. So even if you were to suffer for a long time, there is no, you don't feel that it's taking a lot of time. You don't feel tired when you engage in the bodhisattva practices. And therefore, the Sugata refers to that kind of the means engaged by the bodhisattvas. And if we refer it to the ultimate goal, in one of the texts on Vajrayogini, there is so this youth who is tired with elaborations rests in this peace. And then also in Nagarjuna's fundamental treatise of the middle way, there is mention of pacification of all elaborations, all reifications. So Devara Shekpa does blissfully gone here refers to going into that state of total pacification of all the elaborations, mental constructions. And what brings that about is the realization of emptiness directly, which is the insights of the Arya beings. So through the power of that, you actualize the reality or suchness. What is pacified is the two obscurations, together with the residual imprints. So when you reach that goal where there is total pacification of all mental constructs and the two obscurations, and you can remain in absorption on emptiness, direct absorption on emptiness until the end of forever, then that is the state of Sugata. And then there's mention of the being endowed with Dharmakaya. So that is the in Abhisamaya Alamkara. There's mention of the four Buddha bodies, which are the Swabhavakaya, the Jnanakaya, and then Rupakaya, Sambhokaya, and Nirmanakaya. So if you don't accept these fourfold Buddha bodies, then you would have to say, just say the Buddha appeared 2,550 years ago, and then he engaged in all the activities of giving teachings and so forth. So according to Vaibhashikas, the Buddha accumulated merit and wisdom for over three countless eons, and then became Buddha. So he started with so when the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, was born as Siddhartha, then he in that life he overcame. He completed the completion of the accumulation of the two merits, and then went through, became enlightened. He went through the practice of austerity, and finally became enlightened, and then gave teachings, and finally passed away. And at the end, nothing is left. So, if you have to accept this literally, then there is logical fallacy there, because Nagarjuna also argues. In Mahayana Uttara Tantra, there is mention of the Buddhas actually appearing in the form, body, and engaging in the enlightened activities on the base because of the Dharmakaya. Without wavering from the Dharmakaya at all, they actually are able to perform the enlightened activities. And so, if you can actually understand the life of a Buddha, Shakyamuni, from the point of view of this kind of explanation, then there's not going to be logical fallacies or contradictions. And then, in the highest Yoga Tantra, there is mention of a pure body or a co-emergent body, and because it is because it has no beginning, it is also considered to be a composite, a body which is a composite, and there is also a Buddha body which is non-composite. And this basic quality is what is used in the highest Yoga Tantra as for explanation of how the four Buddha bodies can be attained. So the fact that the mind is free from, is devoid of intrinsic existence is explained in the Sutrayana and Tantrayana, but the mind that is used is not the gross state of mind in the Tantra, but the innate clear-light mind is what is used as the basis for attaining the Buddha's body, speech, and mind. And therefore, you can think about the three Buddha's body, speech, and mind as being of one taste on the basis of this. And therefore, this is prostrating, mentioning of Sargathas endowed with Dharmakaya is very significant. So if you think about the content of the teachings found in the Mahayana scriptures, you can actually say this is the teaching of the Buddha. So just basing on historical accounts will not suffice to explain Buddhahood. And even with regard to the visionary teachings, visions, if you have to explain it on a chronological kind of conventional historical understanding, it would be difficult. But if you think about the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, we can use what are known as the four reasons: the reason of argument, and the functional and relation, and then the reasoning of nature. So ultimately, it all comes down to being nature. So you can talk about chemical reactions happening because of certain potency that certain chemicals have. You have combinations or combining the different chemicals, different particles and materials, and have some product from there. So the way the science engages in the experiments, all this is similar to the Buddhist these four principles that I explained in Buddhism. And Buddha has also said, my monks and scholars, just as gold is tested by burning, cutting, and rubbing, likewise, you should check my teaching and then accept it, but not out of your devotion. So he's saying we should actually check the teaching, experiment, and examine it. And then when you find the truth, then you can believe in his teaching. So similarly, the scientists are actually doing research and experiment with an unbiased attitude. So if you have some kind of a conclusion already in your mind before doing any experiment, saying, oh, this must be such so and so, and then try to do experiment, it may not be unbiased. And so in order to find the truth, you have to be unbiased, and then do analysis. And you should actually have this attitude that anything is possible. And because you are unbiased, then when you actually, if you are biased, as the 400 verses of Aryadeva says, with bias and prejudice, you will never have peace. And so you should be unbiased. And then, as well as their children, refers to the Sangha and all who are worthy of veneration, such as abbots and precept masters and so forth. Mahayana Uttara Tantra deals with the 7 Vajra points: Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and then the Buddha nature. Enlightenment and the enlightened activities. And so in chronological order, we have Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha first, who became enlightened, and then then after that comes the Dharma, which he taught, and through that the followers practice the Dharma and attain the true path within themselves and become a true Sangha. And so you have the Buddha, then Dharma, and Sangha. And now the Buddha's enlightened activity or blessings must work in sentient beings. Now, in order for the blessings to work in us, we can think about the innate clear-light nature of the mind, which is the basis for receiving, for being receptive to the Buddha's blessings. And so that is the kam, or the dhatu, or which is the basic nature, the reality, Buddha nature. So the defilements that are on the mind are mainly ignorance. And this ignorance has always, as long as there is ignorance, there is always a powerful antidote that works against it, and therefore it becomes something which can be eliminated from the mind. And therefore the defilements that are in our minds can be eliminated. And therefore, once you overcome all the defilements, then what you attain is bodhi, or enlightenment. And having attained this enlightenment, where your mind is free from the defilements, the two kinds of, which has two purities, and then you have attained enlightenment. So, having attained enlightenment, then you use your own experience to lead others on the same path, and therefore, to do that, you give the teachings to others, and help them. And so the Buddha is possible because of the Dharma jewel, and also the Sangha is possible because of the Dharma jewel. And therefore, in order to have a genuine sense of taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, you have to understand the Dharma, which comprise the abandonment and the realization. And so you should think about the different the defilements, negative emotions, and so forth that are on our mind, and understand that they have powerful antidotes which can put an end to them. And therefore, Tsongkhapa says, whatever teachings you have given are based on dependent origination. And so, this understanding, by understanding of dependent origination, Tsongkhapa says that one is able to, sentient beings can fulfill their two goals, the temporary and ultimate goal. Temporary in the sense of attaining higher rebirth, and ultimate in the sense of becoming enlightened. And therefore, the teaching on dependent origination can actually defeat all the antagonists. And therefore, Tsongkhapa says, I feel delighted about your teaching. And therefore, understanding the dependent origination of things, you will understand the Dharma jewel, which ultimately refers to this true cessation. And therefore, having respectfully prostrated to them, so having done that, then here I shall, what I will do is explained next. Here I shall explain how to engage in the practices of the Buddha's children, the meaning of which. Then the question arises, are you writing something which you are making up on your own, or fabricating? The answer is no, and the method part of the Bodhisattva practices are based on mainly on Avatamsaka Sutra, and then the wisdom part is based mainly on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And then with regard to the lineage, lineage, there are two lineages. The extensive lineage of the comes from the Maitreya down to Asanga and so forth, and then the profound wisdom tradition comes from Manjushri, Nagarjuna, and so forth. And so, Master Shantideva is saying, the meaning of which I have condensed in accordance with the scriptures. Verse number 2. So this is similar to Dharmakirti's Pramana Vartika, what it shows explicitly is the faults of the audience. So there may be people who listen to some teaching and say, oh, I have received this teaching this many times, they say I have received this and that teaching, and then when they come to teachings, they would always look for something which may be new to them, some kind of information, new information that they have not heard, but not so much interested in its practice. Although the meaning may not be something new, but there are people who are more interested in the articulation of the teachings, and in how it's written, in what kind of language, beautiful or not, it's written. And so, as Shantideva is saying, there's nothing here that has not been explained before, and I have no skill in art of rhetoric or art of composition, and therefore lacking any intention to benefit others. I write this in order to acquaint it to my mind. So explicitly he is saying that this is written for my own benefit, but implicitly what he is saying here is indirectly that those who are not looking just for some beautiful composition, but and also not seeking how many number of times you have received the teachings and so forth, but only thinking of the meaning to practice. He's saying they have to acquaint themselves, their minds, to this teaching. So when you are acquainted with some practice, like virtuous practice which comes from your body or speech or mind, when you are acquainted and accustomed to it, of course in the beginning there's difficulty, but through acquaintance the things become easier to you. And therefore it says, for due to acquaintance with what is wholesome, the force of my faith may for a while increase because of these words. If, however, these words are seen by others equally in fortune to myself, it may be meaningful to them. Leisure and enjoyment are very hard to find, and since they accomplished what is meaningful for humanity, if I do not take advantage of them now, how will such perfect opportunity come about again? So now we have found this human life and met with the teaching of the Buddha, and particularly we have this time to listen to the teaching written by Shantideva, which covers the extensive and the profound teachings of the Buddha through hundreds of numberless reasonings. And then we also have all the necessary facilities or amenities to external and internal, so that we have the opportunity to create causes for higher rebirth, the temporary goal of higher rebirth. When we talk about higher rebirth, we should not think just the next life, but even think about this life that we have found now, which is actually practically a higher rebirth. As I said this morning, we are more or less indulging ourselves in our education and so forth, focused on mere material advancement. And then when trying to find some kind of happiness, people are distract themselves to some interesting music or smell or fragrance and things which have to do more on the sensory level of experience, which is also there, similar to the animals. When they have no problem and when they are fed well, then they are happy, and so they're satisfied. So if you have to rely only on the sensory experiences, then some animals have better sensory sensitivity than us. For example, wild animals can hear better than us, and others like elephants can actually smell things, smell which are very far away. We cannot do that. And then, with regard to hearing sounds, some of the animals, wild animals, can detect even a very slight noise, or those who are not good, those who are hard of hearing, may be different, but animals have much more, are much more sensitive to these senses, objects. But what makes us different from these animals is our mind, the mental consciousness. But while having this, if we were to use this mind only to serve our the sensory experiences, then we are not making any difference. So while having this body, which is of human body, which is higher form of life, if we are not able to use our mind or our speech, but only using it for some kind of entertainment, talking nicely and so forth, so just to serve our emotions, animals can also do this. If you pay attention to even birds, for example, they have different ways of making noise, or when they are very calm, they have a certain way of expressing it through their voice, and when they are so the sparrows have their voice, which they can actually give indicate, through which they can indicate whether there's a danger, or they are they have happiness, or when it's a mating time, they have a certain way of expressing this through voice. And so, if we as humans who have this very rich language, vocabulary, then if we have to use it just for to serve our negative emotions, then this speech does not become is not a speech of higher rebirth. So in order to make this life meaningful, if we could make this life a meaningful one, there is no doubt that you will be able to attain a higher rebirth in the next life. Otherwise, if you are not able to use, if you only use this life just to, in the similar way that animals use it, then there's no difference. In fact, if we use this mind, because of our intelligence, we can use it to, in a very intense way. So the animals, of course, do not feel much fear until their life is endangered. Like when they are taken to slaughterhouses and they are being killed, then they feel that fear of losing their life. But we have this mind which can actually think about future and have all kinds of emotions and anxiety, and also thinking about past experiences. You also develop fear and other emotions. So instead of using our mind, which is so powerful for our virtuous practices, if we use it only for negative purposes, then it's very sad. So, of course, higher rebirth is something which we should gain. But if we use this life, this mind that we have, worse than the animals, then it's really sad. So we have to make this life that we have found to be meaningful. Therefore, the text has this fourth verse. So while we have found this, If I do not take advantage of them now, how will such perfect opportunity come about again? Verse number 5, just as flash of lightning on a dark cloudy night for an instant brightly illuminates all, likewise in this world through through the might of the Buddha, a wholesome thought rarely and briefly appears. So we have found this life on the basis of the practice of morality and the practice of 6 perfections, and then pure prayers. So when we have created also these positive experiences, positive factors, there is danger also of destroying them through our anger. And therefore it says, hence virtue is perpetually feeble. The virtuous practices happen to us occasionally because of the conditions having to come together. It's hard to come by, whereas non-virtue happens very often to us. And so, hence, virtue is perpetually feeble, the great strength of morality being extremely intense, and except for a fully awakening mind, by what other virtue will it be overcome? So, because of our lack of acquaintance with virtue, it's very difficult for us to have virtuous thoughts. So in this life, it's almost like we are beginning to become aware of or practice virtue. It's like entering a school for the first time, where we need to put lots of effort. So we have to put lots of effort to have virtuous thoughts and to do virtuous practices, whereas non-virtuous practices, because we are acquainted with them from lifetimes, for many lives and eons, therefore they happen very easily without having to put any effort. And therefore, virtue is feeble, whereas non-virtue is very strong. And therefore, to overcome non-virtuous and negative actions and cultivate positive ones, if you think about it broadly, there is the bodhicitta. There is nothing other than bodhicitta to do that. So the Kadamba masters also say it. Cultivation of bodhicitta and enhancing it, there's nothing other than doing these. So once you have genuine experience of bodhicitta, then that can purify your negativities and accomplish virtue. And therefore, you have to put all your effort in the developing the bodhicitta. And except for fully awakening mind, by what other virtue will it be overcome? All the Buddhas who have contemplated for many eons have seen it to be beneficial, for by it the limitless masses of beings will quickly attain the supreme state of bliss. So this text has 10 chapters. Of these 10 chapters, the first shows the benefit of bodhicitta. So the chapter is given that title. And now, in order to cultivate or generate this bodhicitta, you have to cultivate it for a long time, over a long period of time. So while cultivating it by using the objects that you have to use in meditation, and also when you actually engage in some ritual, a ceremony to make your determination firm, it will be powerful to do so in front of masters. And then you should also do the 7-limb or the 8-limb practice, which comprise the practices of purification of negativities and accumulation of positive energies. And therefore, you have the confession. And then, therefore, the second chapter is on confession of the 7 limbs. Confession chapter. And then the next chapter is the cultivation or generation of bodhicitta itself. And so that is these 3 chapters are the chapter dealing with the entry into the Mahayana path. Grace for the tea. Please take your tea. Some of them you have actually already taken the tea before the blessing. So in the Chakrasamvara Tantra, Deity Yoga Tantra, there is a practice of making offering to oneself. So you did that. And then the means to attaining the goal, regarding that, there are 6 perfections. The first one is perfection of generosity. So there is no separate chapter on generosity in this text, and there is no need to do so, because in many of the chapters, there are the practices of giving away one's body, wealth, and also roots of virtues. And so those are the practices of generosity. And then there is no actual chapter on morality as such, chapter of morality, but to keep morality pure, there are the 2 chapters on conscientiousness and alertness. Guarding alertness. And then the chapter on patience and enthusiasm. And so in the with regard to the 8th chapter, it deals with the cultivation of bodhicitta, and before doing that, it deals with the concentration practice, and as part of that, it deals with the 4 mindfulness practices, and then deals with the exchanging itself, equalizing, exchanging self and others. And so, just as Tsongkhapa has said, one can overcome all antagonists through the basis of the understanding of dependent origination. Nagarjuna's Bodhicitta Vivarana, or commentary on the awakening mind, is a text which explains certain verses from Goha Samaja Tantra. So it goes through things are devoid of entities, and devoid of self, aggregates, and so forth. And so they deal with the argument against the non-Buddhist philosophical traditions, and also the philosophical positions of lower schools of tenets. Such as the view of mind and being without self and so forth. And then also non-duality. And then the next line refutes the position of the mind on the school. So all phenomena are selfless and equal. And so both the external and internal phenomena are empty of intrinsic existence. And so it deals with the text, with the philosophical positions of the non-Buddhist traditions, as well as the lower schools of tenets, the two realist schools, as well as the Chittamatra. Of course, Nagarjuna's Bodhisattva Vivarana does not explicitly mention the distinction between the Savatantrika Madhyamakas and the Prasangika Madhyamakas as such. But it deals with the practices of bodhisattvas, and then and then it also very briefly mentions the goal, the achieved goal of. And so similarly, here in this text, there is the mention of the ultimate goal of enlightenment. And then the last chapter is dedication. So in the Zapetul Rinpoche's tradition, this one verse which says, "May bodhicitta arise where it has not yet arisen, and may it enhance and increase where it has already arisen, without decline." So according to the Zapetul Rinpoche's tradition, the first three chapters are for developing bodhicitta, where it has not yet arisen or developed, and then the next four chapters are to protect bodhicitta, and then the last three chapters are to increase it, or to promote it further, advance it without decline. So Zapetul Rinpoche was a Rime master. He was like he was a great non-sectarian practitioner, monastic, and like a wandering practitioner, a mendicant. And so, Kuno Lama Rinpoche told me this story that at one time, when Zapetul Rinpoche was doing his meditation in some place, many of his disciples used to visit him, and therefore he left that place. And after leaving the place, when he reached a certain far away place from his hermitage, because he went like a traveler, a pilgrim. Then he reached a house, and then the mother of that house, the lady, actually let him stay there, and she actually made him work in her house. And sometimes she asked, let him actually clean their room, sweep their house, and also throw away the dust. And then at one point, she even let him, made him to take away her urine that was done the night before in a urine pot. And around that time, the disciples of some of the disciples of Zebedee Rinpoche reached the house. They came in search of the master and came to this house, and they asked, "Did you see our Lama?" And the mother of the house said, "I don't know about any Lama, but I have someone who is like a pilgrim." And then she asked, "What does he look like?" And then they described, the students described Zebedee Rinpoche's features, and then she said, then as she heard the description, then the mother had no answer, because she could now she became aware that the Zebedee Rinpoche, it was actually Zebedee Rinpoche whom she had actually sent to throw away her urine. And so the mother actually had to run away from her house, feeling very embarrassed. So this was what Kundalama Lama Rinpoche told me, and I also found it in Zebedee Rinpoche's life story later. And so the Zebedee Rinpoche was someone who held himself lowly. So Dromtempa also has said that you should always hold yourself lowly. And in the 8 verses of mind training, it says, whenever I associate with others, may I hold myself as the lowest, and hold others to be higher. And so there is no greater than Bodhisattva to purify negativities and accumulate merit. Verse number 8 says, those who wish to destroy the many sorrows of their conditioned existence, samsara, and those who wish all beings to experience a multitude of joy, and those who wish to experience much happiness should never forsake the awakening mind. So you can actually add the fourth line in this verse number 8 to each line that goes before it. So the moment an awakening mind arises in those fettered and weak in the jail of cyclic existence, who are suffering through the 3 types of suffering in samsara, in other words, they will be named a child of Sugatas and will be revered by both humans and gods of the world. It is like the supreme gold making elixir, for it transforms the unclean body and so forth. So having obtained this body through one's karmic body, which is full of filth as well, and it is transformed into the gold by bodhicitta. So from the point of view of highest yoga tantra, within this body that we have, there is a subtle, indestructible body, and that perhaps we can use that to refer to this line. And for it transforms the unclean body we have taken into the priceless jewel of a Buddha form, therefore firmly seize this awakening mind. So the Buddhas have first of all cultivated bodhicitta, developed it for the benefit of all sentient beings, and they have trained themselves in the bodhisattva practices in order to benefit others. And finally, they have attained, even after attaining Buddhahood, they are dedicated for the benefit of others. Since the limitless mind of the sole guide of the world, Buddhas, has upon thorough investigation seen its preciousness, all beings wishing to be free from worldly abodes should firmly take hold of this precious awakening mind. And then the next verse also. Usually we wish to have long life or wealth, gain wealth and success, have success in our work. We do, for these, we make offerings to monastics, to big assemblies, and also recite mantras of medicine Buddha, and also to overcome sickness, we say the mantras, and to have longevity, to do mantras of long life deities, and so forth. So of course, when you orient your practice to benefit others, then of course these are good. With an altruistic mind, you do that, that is good. But then if you aim for your own benefit in this life alone, then once your goal is achieved, then the power of that good karma is exhausted. And this is true because of when your aim was just to have some kind of an excellent experience in this life alone, and when that is achieved, then the karma is gone. And also, when you do some practice to attain higher rebirth alone, and once that goal is achieved, the karma is exhausted. Such as the karmas that you create through by keeping morality, generosity, and so forth. And so all other virtues are like the plantain trees. For after bearing fruit, they simply perish. But with regard to bodhicitta, because it is aimed to help all sentient beings, and until the end, all sentient beings are no more, your virtues will never exhaust until the end of space, until the end of the sentient beings. So there is no end to the sentient being as a whole. But from the point of view of individuals, we can say an individual can come to an end as being sentient being. But generally speaking, it's very difficult to talk about the end of sentient beings. And therefore, it says, for after bearing fruit, yet the perennial tree of awakening mind, which is focused or cultivated for the benefit of others, and whatever practices, virtuous practices that you do until your aim is achieved, which is not yet achieved, unceasingly bears fruit and thereby flourishes without end. So we say the verse of taking refuge and bodhicitta. But as I explained this morning, if you think about the meaning of these lines of taking refuge and bodhicitta, and not just to finish recitation of the verse, so that your mind is attuned to the meaning of these lines. And therefore, what you're focused on is Buddhahood. And with that kind of attitude, the virtuous virtue that you create is incessant, like entrusting myself to a brave man. When greatly afraid, by entrusting myself to this, I shall be swiftly liberated. So, after studying about bodhicitta and then applying the teaching within yourself so that you have some degree of experience of bodhicitta within yourself, and also if you go over the meditation on a daily basis again and again, the bodhicitta has the quality of focusing on enlightenment through wisdom and focusing on sentient beings through compassion, with compassion. So when we create some negative karma, it can either be done in relation to sentient beings or higher objects of refuge. And also positive actions also can be cultivated by having confidence in the higher objects of refuge, and also through the compassion to sentient beings. So you are sincere in dedicating yourself for the benefit of others. And so, so many of our negative actions which are created through body, speech and mind come in relation to other sentient beings, either sentient beings who are lower to us or higher objects of refuge. And therefore, there's no greater factor for purifying negativities than bodhicitta. So, just like the fire at the end of the age, it instantly consumes all great wrongdoings. Its unfathomable advantages were taught to the disciples Sudana by the wise Lord Maitreya. So this reference is to the Gandhavayuha Sutra. So with regards to bodhicitta, as I mentioned earlier, in the 8,000 lines of Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, as I said earlier, be courageous or confident. I have a story to tell here. On the 17th of March 1959, I fled Nobulinka, the summer palace of the Dalai Lamas, and so before leaving, I read the 8,000 verses of 8,000 verses of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, and I actually came to that point where it says, you should be confident or courageous. And so, therefore, although I was feeling very frightened because of the situation, the real situation, I came to that line. And then I left Nobulinka. And so, bodhicitta is defined in Maitreya's Abhisamaya Alamkara. So when explaining the bodhicitta with reference to the line that I left, at which I left Nobulinka, in Abhisamaya Alamkara it says bodhicitta is for the sake of others, aspiring to reach the complete enlightenment. And then in its explanation, in his explanation, the Haribhadra says, talks about the two-fold aspiration which help bodhicitta, which are the compassion, which serves as the causal aspiration, and then the actual aspiration which is focused on enlightenment, which goes with bodhicitta itself. So when you are selfish, the mind is very narrow. You have a very narrow mind. But instead of having the selfish mind, what you are doing with bodhicitta is you are actually expanding your scope. And so bodhicitta is also called bodhi chittotpadya or something like that, and which means having this expansive attitude. And then, of course, there is the division of bodhicitta into 22. But in terms of the nature of bodhicitta, division of bodhicitta in terms of its nature, there are it's twofold. It says in brief, the awakening mind should be understood to be of two types: the mind that aspires to awaken and the mind that ventures to do so. And then the next verse, as is understood by the distinction and so forth. So these two bodhicittas are differentiated like this. For example, if you want to go to Varanasi city from here, you have the wish to go there, and then after that you actually take the journey to go there. So in both cases, of course, you have the wish to go, but in the first case, you only have the wish, and while going there, you still have the wish to go there. And so, similarly, the aspiring and engaging bodhicittas are differentiated like that. When you have the wish to become a Buddha, to reach Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings, that is aspiring bodhicitta. And under the influence of this bodhicitta, when you take bodhisattva vows, which means you want to engage in the practices of bodhisattvas, and you make a promise to do so, and commit yourself to venture on the bodhisattva practices, then that bodhicitta becomes the engaging bodhicitta. There are different ways of interpreting these two types of bodhicitta, but basically in Kamala Shila's stages of meditation, this distinction is made. So with regard to the benefit of bodhicitta, it was mentioned earlier. So from now on, from verse 17 onwards, what is shown is the benefits, the difference in the benefits of engaging and aspiring bodhicitta. Although great fruits occur in cycling existence from the mind that aspires to awaken, an uninterrupted flow of merit does not ensue, as it does with the venturing mind. So, of course, aspiring bodhicitta is very powerful to create positive energy within us, creating merit, but it's not as powerful as the venturing bodhicitta or engaging bodhicitta, which creates the uninterrupted flow of merit. Verse number 18. Determining to fulfill the purpose of all sentient beings who are equal, as limitless as the space, and vowing to yourself there is nothing else that you that you can do except helping others. So from the time when you commit yourself and make the pledge to engage in the Bodhisattva practices to help others sentient beings, from that time on, because of this firm pledge, the unceasing flow of merit ensue. And for those who have perfectly seized this mind with the thought never to turn away from totally liberating the infinite forms, from that time hence, even while asleep or unconcerned, a force of merit equal to space will perpetually ensue. For the sake of those inclined towards the lesser vehicle, this was logically asserted by the Tathagata himself in the sutra requested by Subahu. If even the thought to relieve living creatures of merely a headache is a beneficial intention endowed with infinite goodness, then what need is there to mention the wish to dispel their inconceivable misery, wishing every single one of them to realize boundless good qualities. So even in our life, if we have nurses or someone serving some sick person, or also donors of organs such as kidney or eyes, of course we'll feel always appreciate and feel amazed at such donations. So there is no need to mention about the benefit of bodhicitta, which thinks of benefiting sentient beings until the end of space, until the end of sentient beings, totally dedicated towards their welfare. So do even fathers and mothers have such a benevolent intention as this? Do the gods and sages? Does even Brahma have it? So these gods and sages and Brahmas are those objects of veneration for other beings. If those beings have never before even dreamt of such an attitude for their own sake, how would it ever arise for the sake of others? So with regard to Buddhahood, which is where you have full knowledge and all excellent qualities and free from being the state which is free from all defects or shortcomings. So knowing the causes and conditions which lead to Buddhahood, and when you actually dedicate yourself to cultivate it, bodhicitta, such an attitude is not there even in the gods and sages and so forth. To cultivate this attitude, even for their own sake, how would it ever arise for the others' sake of others? This intention to benefit all beings, which does not arise in other even for their own sake, is an extraordinary jewel of the mind, and its birth is an unprecedented wonder. 25. How can I fathom the depths of the goodness of this jewel of mind, the panacea that relieves the world of pain and is the source of all its joy? So it's a source of joy for all sentient beings, because you are dedicated for their short-term and long-term goals of higher rebirth and liberation. In the mind training practice, you have the practice of transforming the five degenerations into the path, benefiting others for enlightenment. If merely a benevolent intention excels veneration of the Buddhas, then what need to mention striving to make all beings without exception happy? All sentient beings want happiness and not suffering, as I said this morning. And everyone is, of course, cherish themselves, and they think about their own benefit. And therefore, what need is there to work for others? If you ask this, then it says, although wishing to be rid of misery, they run toward misery itself. Although wishing to have happiness like an enemy, they're ignorant, they destroy it. So sentient beings, and especially if we think about the 7 billion people and on this earth, everyone wants to get rid of suffering. But the root or the source of suffering is within ourselves, our hopes and desire and so forth, and which in turn is rooted in ignorance. And therefore Buddha has said that suffering is rooted in ignorance. When we enter some monastery, at the door of the monastery, we usually find the wheel of life, paintings of wheel of life, in which in the center there is the depiction of the 3 animals, and the pig depicting a pig depicting ignorance. And then we have the 12 links of dependent origination at the outer rim. Therefore, ignorance with ignorance, we create karma, and which leaves imprints on the consciousness, and then finally we end in aging and death. So this is the chain is depicted in the 12 chains, depicted in the 12 the wheel of life. So ignorance is overcome through the powerful antidote. Although ignorance is very powerful, it has no authentic or valid support. It only has its own support, but you can find that it does not have any misperception, and therefore is baseless. So when you understand dependent origination, then the ignorance becomes rather fragile, and once the strength of ignorance is weakened, then the creation of karma and through desire and anger and so forth also is weakened. We actually cherish this self-grasping, grasping at itself, and actually try to justify it for ourselves. And then we talk about me, then you extend to this attitude towards my parents, my relatives, and my friends, and so forth, and then you extend to others as being my enemy and so forth, and you are involved in this emotional game. So we are unaware that ignorance and creates the causes of suffering, and therefore we run after the suffering. And then with regard to happiness, if you help others and not without harming others, if you help others, you will create a cause of happiness. So for some temporary benefit, you try to bully others, you cheat others, you deceive others, and as a result, what you get is suffering. And because of this holding on to the self-cherishing as being true, then you remain in samsara and be far away from higher rebirths and nirvana. And therefore it says, although wishing to be rid of misery, they run out of misery. Although wishing to have happiness, like an enemy, they ignorant, they destroy it. So if you cultivate bodhicitta, which is the ultimate altruistic attitude, even arahats have obscuration to knowledge. And then those who are samsaric beings, they have both obscurations, afflictive emotions as well as the cognitive obscurations. For those who are deprived of happiness and burdened with many sorrows, it satisfies them with all joys, dispels all suffering. So when you cultivate bodhicitta, what you are thinking of doing is to engage in the Buddha, to attain a Buddhahood where there is the 727 different Buddha activities to help others. And therefore you develop the wisdom, and with the help of that you hold others to be more dear than oneself and disregard one's own happiness, and seeing the shortcomings of self-cherishing, extreme self-cherishing attitude and benefit of holding others, self-cherishing others. It clears away all confusion. So because of understanding of law of causality, you also avoid ignorance about causality. And then because of understanding of the dependent nature of things, you do away with the, eliminate the ignorance about reality. And therefore, you will be able to create, lead yourself to higher rebirths and enlightenment. Where is there such comparable? Where is there a comparable virtue? Where is there even such a friend? Where is there merit similar to this? If whomever repay a kind deed is worthy of some praise, then what need to mention the Bodhisattva who do good without being asked for them? The world honors as virtuous one who sometimes gives little plain food disrespectfully to a few beings, which satisfies them for only a half a day. So for a short time, a very trivial thing with disrespect. If you get something, so you get a small food, and which is given with disrespectful manners, and for the purpose of satisfying you for half a day. If such is honored in the world, what needs be said then of one who eternally bestows the peerless bliss of the Sugatas? Upon limitless number of beings, thereby fulfilling all their hopes, so if ordinary virtue is considered to called honored, appreciated in the world, then such an extraordinary virtue which comes from bodhicitta, dedicated towards benefit of others, and with such dedication you talk in a gentle way to others and so forth. What need is there to mention about its benefits? The Buddha has said that whoever bears a harmful thought against a benefactor, such as a bodhisattva, will remain in hell for as many eons as there were harmful thoughts. So there is such a negative consequence of having negative thought, harmful thought towards bodhisattvas. And if you have, on the contrary, a virtuous thought in relation to such a bodhisattva, then that also has very powerful positive consequences. So as long as you have a non-virtuous thought, like attachment and anger, of course, which are there are many degrees of subtlety within that. So certain attachment and aversion or anger happens due to holding on to some kind of a substantially existent self-sufficient I. But we also have this notion of things having. So the coarse levels of afflictive emotions come from, as an effect of the grasping a true existence, but the subtle ones actually go together with the ignorance, that ignorance. So the affective emotions all come from this notion of true existence of things. But this ignorance actually is baseless. And therefore all the non-virtuous thoughts are baseless. Whereas the virtuous thoughts have valid support. So although there are opposites, virtuous mind and virtuous thoughts and non-virtuous thoughts are opposites, but if you actually engage in the virtuous practices over a long period of time, then they gain, they actually overwrite the non-virtuous thoughts completely. And in tantric, from tantric point of view, the non-virtuous thoughts cannot happen once the 80 different thoughts have ceased in our mind. However, if a virtuous attitude should arise in that regard, its fruits will multiply far more than that. When bodhisattvas greatly suffer, they generate no negativity. Instead, their virtues naturally increase. I bow down to the body of those in whom the sacred precious mind is born. I seek refuge in that source of joy who brings happiness, even to those who bring harm. And then second chapter, there's not much to explain. And so, as a preliminary practice for cultivating bodhicitta, we have the 7 limb practices, 7 branch or 7 limb practices. And so the first here, the second chapter deals with the confession, or you should reflect on the fact that all temporary and ultimate happiness and benefits come from an altruistic intention. And then you develop the aspiring bodhicitta. And for that, you have to overcome negativities and cultivate virtue or positive things. So in the practice of overcoming negativities, you have these practices of confession. Here, first there is the offering. whatever flowers and fruits. In order to seize that precious mind, I offer now to the Tathagatas, to the sacred Dharma, the stainless jewel, and to the disciples of Buddha, the ocean of excellence, whatever flowers and fruits there are, and whatever kinds of medicine, whatever jewels exist in this world, and whatever clean, fresh waters, likewise gem-encrusted mountain, forest groves, quiet and joyful places, heavenly trees be decked with flowers, and trees with fruit-laden branches, fragrance of celestials and so forth. So first is the practice of making offering. So with regard to the offering, there are actually arranged offerings and then mentally emanated, imagined offerings. So usually I say this in cosmology, the scientists explain how the world has come into being, and then also there's so much advancement in the technology or the instruments that they used. But today, in the past, they have instruments which through which they can see to certain subtle particles. But today, the instruments are so advanced that you can actually see the very subtle particles of things, which I have actually experienced myself. And then they also explain in great detail about the different celestial bodies, the stars and planets and so forth, which are actually observed through telescopes and also through measurements and calculations. And therefore, scientifically, the world is said to be spherical, and therefore we have to accept this. Rinpoche says, if you accept something which is against reason, then the person cannot be authentic or authoritative, cannot be considered to be authoritative. If that is the case, then if we are actually go against what is empirical, then we cannot be authoritative or in logic. We have the different reasonings proving things through the reason of such as using some effects to prove the cause and so forth. And then we have also the reasoning which is said the reason of inaccessibility and so forth. So things are observed, and then whereas something should be accessible, and if it is not seen or accessible, then we can say that does not exist. And so through this we overcome doubts which are exaggerations or denial. For example, in Abhidharma, there's mention of Mount Meru, and there is the Mount Meru above the sea is 4 leagues, 40 leagues or so above and then the sun and the moon are said to go around the Mount Meru, circling the Mount Meru, and then the sides of the sun and moon are also said to be of very little difference, almost equal. And then the distance from the Earth of the sun and the moon are also said to be something, whereas the distance that we find the sun to be from the Earth is much further than the distance of the moon from the sun. So if we were to actually deny these facts, then it's very difficult. So I usually say that in relation to this world, I am usually saying that the Mount Meru does not exist. So those who have studied the third chapter of Abhidhammakosha might say that the Dalai Lama is not a Buddhist because he denies this Mount Meru. So if you list the people who are not Buddhists, you would consider me, and I would come number one in the list. So I usually say that we have the explanation of the basis, the fruit, the path and the fruit based on logic and reasoning. While we have such a wonderful tradition, if we have to go against reason, and not only that, if we have to go against what is empirical, then it's not so good. Even if the 400 million or so Buddhists were to say they swear that there is Mount Meru, the science, the world will not accept that. Abhidhammakosha's explanation of the difference and the different explanations of Mount Meru and the continent and so forth that we find in Kalachakra system and the Abhidhamma system may be explained on the basis of the karmic theory, but it's different. It's difficult. If you go up into space and look down on the earth, you will not see this earth to be flat, but you'll see a round world. Of course, there is the factor of karma in terms of seeing. So this is difficult it is difficult for us to accept Mount Meru and what is explained in Abhidhammakosha about flat world and so forth. And then having explained these things, the non-existence of Mount Meru and so forth, somebody, a practitioner, asked me, in that case, is there any benefit of doing the mandala offering? He was quite sincere. So I said, of course, we have this the 1 billion world system and so forth that we can imagine on in our offering of the mandala. So it's the mandala offering that we use, which actually has the imagination. We imagine the Mount Meru and the 400 and so forth are symbolic. So with regard to the Abhidhamma text, there is a system which says that the 7 Abhidhamma texts are actually the teaching of the Buddha, the words of the Buddha. But Abhidhammakosha says that it is so cold, the teaching of the Buddha. So there are many things which are explained symbolically in the text. So in the case of Kalachakra, for example, the Mount Meru and so forth are explained in connection with our human body. For example, the spine, spinal, the spine is analogous, taken as Mount Meru and so forth. And then there is also the explanation of the practices in relation to the what are to be purified and in relation to the external, internal worlds. And so we cannot take all these teachings literally, what is found in Abhidhammakosha. Eternally shall I offer, verse number 8. Eternally I shall offer all my bodies to the conquerors and their children. So this body that you have is with you. Of course, you're making a practical offering. So when we make chalk offerings, roasted barley cake and ritual cakes, then we make very good cakes. Whereas when we make other tormas, then we use worse butter and so forth. Butter which are rancid could be used for tormas. And when we make tormas, for example, we can also make it very put lots of water in the flour and make tormas. But when we make chalk, which in the end is distributed to the assembly, we make it very delicious, putting in lots of sweet and nutritious ingredients. And then we say we have made thousands of offerings. In Lhasa, there is a place called Dipsejoling Monastery, and the people there eat the torma ritual cakes. And so Lhasa people nicknamed them eaters, torma eaters. So if you don't think carefully, we take many things for granted, but we are not, it's all just for show and not real. So practically it says here, eternally I shall offer my body, so my body is to the conquerors and the children. So from now on, you sincerely offer your body, your wealth, and roots of virtue for the sake of others. All Buddhas and their children, Bodhisattvas, have nothing else to do but to serve other sentient beings, and therefore you offer yourself up in the service of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Please accept me, you supreme heroes. Respectfully shall I be your subject. So by sincerely offering up your body to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, so that it becomes for them to use however they like, but it's not just being offered for the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas just for their sake alone, but what they do is to serve others. They serve other sentient beings, and therefore bodhicitta is only thinking of helping other sentient beings, and therefore indirectly you are offering up your body to serve sentient beings. By being completely under your care, I shall benefit all with no fears of conditioned existence. So you become someone who is protected, who has refuge. I shall perfectly consent my previous transgressions, and in future shall commit no more. I'll stop here for today. Page number 9, verse 10, finished. So as I teach this text, Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, and I give short explanations, if you have time, read this and try to remember what I have explained. And then later, when you go back to home, the explanations, you should keep in mind my explanations and not forget them. And if you acquaint your mind with this, then you will have change of mind, transformation. 100%. So don't forget the explanations that I've given. Buddha has said in many texts, in many scriptures, he said, listen well and keep it in mind. So keeping it in your mind comes when you actually remind yourself of these practices over and over again. This is the prayer of the words of truth written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Homage to the Triple Gem, magnificent masters of an ocean of limitless good qualities, those going to bliss of the 3 times, your children and disciples looking upon destitute migrators like your only child, please pay attention to my true words of sorrow. Expand the doctrine of the completely perfect capable one, which removes the sufferings of cyclic existence and solitary peace for abundant extensive welfare and happiness in Jambudvipa. Increase the 10 kinds of dharma conduct of all those learned and accomplished holders of the doctrine, by pacifying all the unbearable dangers of sickness, weapons, and famine. Cause those migrators totally compelled by intolerable strong karma, stricken by the torture of sufferings without respite, to recover their breath in an ocean of happiness and joy, particularly for all migratory beings in the religious snowland, oppressed with evil actions by the barbarian hordes from the black side, devoid of love. May your power of compassion arise and quickly stop the flow of blood and tears. May all the unruly groups of people maddened by the demons of afflictive emotions, who, by their rough behavior, ruin themselves and others, fully obtain the eye which sees that object of compassion, and obtain magnificent love, kindness, and affection. The wish that has long dwelt in our heart is glorious, complete freedom for the entire land of Tibet. Bestow soon the fortune to enjoy that celebration of spontaneous religious and secular harmony. All the people who have completely given up their cherished body, life, and possessions, and endure hundreds of hardships for the sake of doctrine, its holders, their country, and their compatriots, may they be guarded by the compassion of the protector of Patala. In short, may the good fruit of any extensive prayer to fully protect the land of snows made by the powerful protector Chandra, seeking the presence of Buddhas and their children appear soon and now.